Declassified, 1943. High above the channel, where the grey waters met greyer skies, two fighters danced the oldest ritual of war. A German Messerschmitt Bf 109, Black Cross Stark against winter camouflage, pursued a wounded RAF Spitfire, trailing smoke like a dying comet. The German pilot, Oberleutnant Klaus Richter, had the advantage: altitude, position, and an aircraft still running at full power. The British pilot was finished. He just didn't know it yet. Richter lined up his sights. His finger tightened on the trigger. The cannon roared. Tracers arced across the sky. The Spitfire shuddered, then began its final dive toward the channel below. Another kill. Another statistic in the brutal arithmetic of aerial combat. Richter watched the Spitfire disappear into the clouds, marked it in his combat log, and turned for home. He never learned the name of the pilot he had shot down that day. He didn't know that Flight Lieutenant James Harrington had survived the ditching, been pulled from the freezing water by a Royal Navy corvette, and spent 3 months in a military hospital. He didn't know that shrapnel from Richter's cannon had severed Harrington's optic nerve, leaving him permanently, irrevocably blind, and he certainly couldn't have imagined that 20 years later he would shake that same pilot's hand at a NATO airbase in West Germany. But that's exactly what happened. January 1943. James Harrington was 22 years old, a promising fighter pilot with 11 confirmed kills and a reputation for aggressive tactics that bordered on reckless. He had survived the Battle of Britain, the Malta convoys, and countless sweeps over occupied France. His squadron mates called him Lucky Jim because he always came back, no matter how shot up his aircraft became. On that particular morning, luck ran out. The mission was a routine fighter sweep. Escort bombers to the target, engage any German interceptors, return to base. Harrington's section encountered a formation of Bf 109s climbing to meet them. The sky erupted into chaos. Aircraft twisted and turned in deadly spirals, contrails marking the paths of hunters and hunted. Harrington got on the tail of 109, fired a long burst, and watched it spiral away, trailing fire. Then something slammed into his aircraft from behind. The cockpit exploded in a shower of metal fragments and shattered perspex. Pain lanced through his head. His vision went red, then black. He couldn't see. Blood filled his eyes, or was there nothing to see with? Training took over. He couldn't see his instruments, couldn't see the horizon, couldn't see anything, but he could feel. He could hear the engine note, feel the stick pressure, sense the aircraft's attitude through the seat of his pants. He nosed the Spitfire down, building speed, trying to get away from the fight. German pilots rarely chased a damaged aircraft all the way to the deck. It wasn't worth the risk. He was wrong about that. Klaus Richter, methodical and thorough, followed the wounded Spitfire down through the clouds. This was standard doctrine: confirm your kills. Too many German pilots had claimed victories only to have their supposed victims limp home and return to combat. Richter wanted no ambiguity in his combat record. At 2,000 feet, he caught up with the Spitfire. It was flying erratically, weaving slightly, clearly damaged, an easy target. He closed to 200 meters and fired again. The burst was precise, surgical. Rounds walked along the Spitfire's fuselage, shredding metal, destroying systems. The engine coughed, caught fire, died. Harrington felt the second impact even if he couldn't see it. The engine seized. Oil pressure dropped to 0. He was going down, and there was only one place to go: into the channel. He couldn't see to execute a proper ditching, couldn't judge altitude or attitude. He did the only thing he could. He aimed the nose slightly down, waited for what felt like the right moment, and pulled back hard on the stick. The Spitfire hit the water at 120 Marinus. The impact was catastrophic. The aircraft disintegrated around him. Water rushed into the cockpit, freezing and black. Harrington, barely conscious, bleeding blind, somehow managed to release his harness, kick free of the wreckage, and inflate his Mae West life jacket. He surfaced, gasping, in water so cold it felt like knives against his skin. Above him, Klaus Richter circled once, confirming the kill. Pilot in the water. Aircraft sinking. No possibility of return to service. He marked the position, waggled his wings in the traditional salute to a fallen enemy, and turned for home. He had been trained to respect brave opponents even in death. It never occurred to him the British pilot might survive. But James Harrington did survive. 47 minutes in the freezing channel before HMS Vervain spotted him and pulled him aboard. 3 months in the hospital. multiple surgeries to save his life, none of which could save his sight. When James Harrington woke in the hospital at RAF Halton, the first thing he noticed was the absence of light. Not darkness. Darkness implies the possibility of illumination. This was void, absolute nothingness where sight should have been. A military surgeon, a man who had delivered this news to too many young pilots, explained with clinical precision that the optic nerve damage was irreversible. Flight Lieutenant Harrington would never see again, never fly again. His war was over. The RAF offered him a medical discharge with full honors and a disability pension. At 22 years old, having spent 3 years in the cockpit defending his country, Harrington could return to civilian life. The service would understand. Everyone would understand. A blind pilot was a contradiction, an impossibility. What use could the military have for a man who couldn't see? Harrington's response was immediate and unequivocal. He refused to quit. If he couldn't fly, he would do something else. If he couldn't fight in the air, he would fight on the ground. The RAF, accustomed to pilots demanding to return to combat despite injuries, had never encountered someone quite like Harrington. Blind pilots simply didn't exist in any military doctrine. But his determination, combined with the desperate manpower needs of a nation at war, opened an unexpected door. By mid-1943, the RAF was expanding rapidly. Training programs needed instructors, intelligence sections needed analysts. Administrative roles needed competent officers who understood military aviation. Harrington, leveraging his combat experience and refusing to accept pity, talked his way into an intelligence posting. He couldn't see reconnaissance photographs, but he could listen to debriefings, analyze pilot reports, and contribute to tactical planning based on his intimate knowledge of aerial combat. He learned Braille with the same intensity he had once learned gunnery deflection. He memorized aircraft recognition by sound, engine notes, propeller pitch, the subtle differences between a Merlin and a Daimler-Benz. He developed a mental map of every airfield where he served, counting steps, memorizing layouts, refusing assistance unless absolutely necessary. Officers who initially treated him with kid gloves quickly learned that Harrington demanded to be judged by his competence, not his disability. By 1944, he was attached to Fighter Command Headquarters, analyzing German tactics and contributing to mission planning. His unique perspective, a combat veteran who had fought against the Luftwaffe and survived being shot down, made his insights valuable. He could describe exactly what a German fighter pilot would do in specific situations because he had faced them. His blindness, paradoxically, made him focus entirely on the tactical and psychological elements of air combat, stripping away visual distractions. Meanwhile, across the Channel, Klaus Richter's war was taking a different trajectory. By 1943, the Luftwaffe was bleeding experienced pilots at an unsustainable rate. The Russian front, North Africa, and the increasingly lethal skies over Germany itself were consuming the best and brightest of the fighter arm. Richter, now a seasoned ace with 28 confirmed kills, was pulled from combat and assigned as an instructor. It was not a reward. German pilots called it the graveyard of aces, training inexperienced boys to fly aircraft they barely understood, sending them to combat where they would die within weeks. Richter, methodical and conscientious, threw himself into the role. If he couldn't fight himself, he could at least give his students the skills to survive. He taught them to be cautious, to fight smart rather than bravely, to understand that dead heroes were just dead. He tried not to think about the pilots he had killed. It was war. They would have killed him if positions were reversed. But some nights, especially after losing yet another student to combat, he found himself remembering specific encounters. The Spitfire pilot he had shot down over the Channel haunted him particularly. The way the aircraft had flown erratically after the first hit, the pilot's desperate attempt to reach safety, the final ditching that should have been fatal. Richter had reported the pilot as killed in action, standard procedure when an aircraft was destroyed and the pilot went into the water. But he had never been certain. Had the British pilot survived? Was he still fighting somewhere, bearing the scars of their encounter? The uncertainty gnawed at him during quiet moments. The war ended. Germany, shattered and divided, began the slow process of rebuilding. Richter, stripped of his military rank and forbidden from flying by the occupation authorities, worked as a mechanic, then an engineer. When West Germany was permitted to rearm in 1955, and the Luftwaffe was reborn as part of NATO, Richter was among the first recruits. His experience, his tactical knowledge, and his fluency in English made him valuable. Not as a pilot, those days were over, but as a liaison officer, working with Allied air forces to build the new integrated defense structure. Harrington, meanwhile, had carved out a distinguished post-war career in RAF intelligence. His analytical work during the war had established his reputation. He specialized in tactical analysis and pilot training doctrine, traveling to various NATO bases to consult and advise. He had married, raised a family, and built a life that transcended the limitations his injury might have imposed. Neither man knew the other's name, neither knew their paths had crossed in lethal combat 20 years earlier. Neither could have predicted that in 1963, both would be assigned to RAF Gütersloh in West Germany. Harrington as a visiting RAF intelligence liaison, Richter as the Luftwaffe liaison officer to the same base. The stage was set for an impossible reunion. RAF Gütersloh, West Germany, March 1963. The Cold War had transformed former enemies into uneasy allies. The base, built by the Luftwaffe during the war and captured by Allied forces in 1945, now served as a critical NATO installation. British Hawker Hunters and German F-84 Thunderstreaks shared the same runways where Messerschmitts had once scrambled to intercept Allied bombers. The irony was not lost on the older officers, who remembered when these men had been trying to kill each other. Squadron leader James Harrington, now 42 years old, arrived at Gütersloh on a grey March morning. His assignment was to conduct a comprehensive review of joint NATO fighter tactics and integration procedures between British and German air units. It was the kind of work he excelled at, analysing doctrine, interviewing pilots, identifying weaknesses in coordination and communication. His blindness, which might have been a crippling disability in any other military role, barely mattered in this context. He conducted interviews by listening, absorbed information through briefings and recordings, and produced reports that were dictated to his assistant. Major Klaus Richter, liaison officer for the Luftwaffe contingent at Gütersloh, received notification of Harrington's visit with professional interest. The RAF officer had a formidable reputation in NATO circles, a blind combat veteran who had somehow built a distinguished career in military intelligence and tactical analysis. Richter, responsible for coordinating between German and British units, would be working closely with Harrington for the next 3 months. Their first meeting was scheduled for March 18th in the base commander's office. Group Captain Richardson made the introductions with typical British formality. Squadron Leader Harrington, may I present Major Klaus Richter, our Luftwaffe liaison. Major Richter, Squadron Leader James Harrington from RAF Intelligence. Richter extended his hand, then hesitated, unsure of the protocol when greeting a blind man. Harrington, sensing the pause, smiled slightly and extended his own hand with practiced precision. Major Richter, a pleasure. I'm looking forward to working with you. The handshake was firm, professional. 2 military officers meeting for the first time. Nothing unusual, nothing remarkable, except that 20 years earlier, one had tried to kill the other and very nearly succeeded. As they settled into the conference room to begin their work, Richardson outlined the scope of the review. NATO command was concerned about response times during scramble alerts, coordination between ground controllers and airborne fighters, and the language barriers that still plagued joint operations despite everyone's supposed proficiency in English. Harrington listened carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Richter found himself impressed by the British officer's grasp of tactical nuances. This was no desk-bound bureaucrat. Harrington understood fighter operations at a fundamental level, the split-second decisions, the fuel calculations, the geometry of interception. He spoke about air combat with an authority that could only come from experience. During a break in the briefing, Richter's curiosity got the better of him. Squadron leader, if you don't mind my asking, you have extensive knowledge of fighter operations. Were you a pilot during the war? Harrington's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted slightly. I was. Spitfires primarily. I flew from 1940 to early 1943. Impressive service. And your injury happened in combat. January 1943 over the Channel. German fighter got the better of me. Harrington's tone was matter-of-fact, devoid of bitterness. Shot me down into the drink. I was lucky. A Royal Navy corvette fished me out. The blindness was permanent, but I survived. Others weren't so fortunate. Richter felt something cold settle in his stomach. January 1943, over the Channel. A Spitfire. He had dozens of combat reports from that period, but one particular engagement stood out with crystal clarity. The wounded Spitfire diving through clouds. The pilot who had fought brilliantly despite catastrophic damage. The ditching he had witnessed. The pilot he had assumed was killed. He told himself it was coincidence. Hundreds of pilots had been shot down over the Channel. Dozens in January 1943 alone. The odds of this being the same pilot, the one he still occasionally remembered during sleepless nights, were astronomical. But the date, the location, the injury, the survival. "May I ask," Richter said carefully, "what date in January?" Harrington paused, sensing something in Richter's tone. "The 14th. Why do you ask?" Richter's mind raced. January 14th, 1943. He remembered it exactly because it had been his 28th confirmed victory, and because the engagement had haunted him in ways his other kills had not. The skill of the British pilot, the desperation of the final dive, the water impact that should have been fatal. "Major Richter?" Harrington's voice pulled him back to the present. "Is something wrong?" "No, Richter struggled to find words. "Squadron leader, I must ask you something. This may seem strange, but your aircraft that day, after you were hit, did you continue to maneuver? Did you dive through cloud cover?" Harrington's posture changed completely. He went very still. "How could you possibly know that? Those details weren't in any public reports." The conference room suddenly felt very small. Richardson, sensing the shift in atmosphere, looked between the two officers with growing concern. Richter's voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I was flying the Messerschmitt that shot you down. I followed you through the clouds. I fired the second burst that destroyed your engine. I watched you ditch in the Channel. I circled once to confirm the kill, and then I flew home." The silence that followed was absolute. Harrington sat motionless, his face unreadable. 20 years dissolved in an instant. He was back in the cockpit, blood in his eyes, pain lancing through his head, the second burst of cannon fire ripping his aircraft apart. The man who had done that, who had taken his sight, his career as a pilot, who had nearly taken his life, was sitting 3 feet away. Richardson started to say something, but Harrington raised a hand, silencing him. For several long seconds, neither man moved. The revelation hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Richardson, the base commander, looked from one officer to the other, his hand instinctively moving toward the telephone as if preparing to call security. This was unprecedented. Enemy combatants from the war occasionally encountered each other in NATO contexts, but never like this. Never with such intimate, violent history between them. Harrington finally broke the silence. "You followed me all the way down. Most German pilots would have claimed the kill after the first burst and returned to altitude." His voice was steady, analytical, devoid of accusation. "You wanted to be certain." "Standard doctrine," Richter replied, his throat tight. "Confirm your victories." "Too many pilots claimed kills that survived and returned to combat." He paused, then added quietly, "I reported you as killed in action. I was certain no one could survive that ditching. The water was freezing. You were clearly wounded, and your aircraft disintegrated on impact." "I should have died," Harrington acknowledged. 47 minutes in the Channel. Hypothermia should have killed me within 10. The head wound should have killed me before that." But HMS Vervain's lookout happened to be scanning the right patch of ocean at the right moment. 1 in 1,000 chance, maybe 1 in 10,000. Richardson cleared his throat. "Gentlemen, perhaps we should—" "No." Harrington's voice was firm. "Major Richter, you said you circled once after I ditched. Did you waggle your wings?" Richter blinked, startled by the question. "Yes, it was a salute. You had fought well, bravely. It seemed appropriate to acknowledge that, even in death." Something shifted in Harrington's expression. Not quite a smile, but a softening. "I was told about that. The corvette captain mentioned it in his report. He said the German pilot who shot me down performed a victory roll and departed. I always wondered if that was respect or mockery." "Respect," Richter said immediately. "Always respect. You were a worthy opponent. Even while I was trying to kill you, I recognized your skill." The tension in the room began to ebb, replaced by something more complex. Richardson, sensing the moment required privacy, quietly excused himself, closing the door behind him. The two former enemies were alone. Richter struggled to find words adequate to the moment. Squadron Leader Harrington, I apologize is insufficient. I was following orders, executing my mission. But that doesn't change the fact that I destroyed your life. You lost your sight, your career as a pilot. 20 years of living in darkness because of me. Harrington was quiet for a long moment, his sightless eyes fixed somewhere past Richter's shoulder. When he spoke, his voice carried weight, earned through 2 decades of contemplation. Major, I've had a long time to think about what happened that day. Do you know what conclusion I reached? No, sir. That you were doing your job, just as I was doing mine. You didn't shoot me down because you hated me personally. You shot me down because I was the enemy. Wearing the wrong uniform, flying for the wrong side in a war neither of us started. If our positions had been reversed, if I had gotten on your tail first, I would have done exactly the same thing. I would have fired, confirmed the kill, and flown home without a second thought. But the consequences were part of the risk I accepted the moment I climbed into that cockpit, Harrington interrupted. Every combat pilot knows the odds. Some die. Some get captured. Some, like me, survive but carry the scars. You didn't create the war, Major Richter. You just fought in it, same as me. Richter felt something unclench in his chest, a burden he hadn't fully recognized he was carrying. For 20 years, I have remembered that engagement. The way your aircraft flew after the first hit suggested the pilot was wounded but still fighting. I admired that, and I have wondered occasionally if you might have survived. Part of me hoped you had. Part of me feared it. Why feared? Because if you had survived, it meant you lived with the consequences of my actions. That burden seemed heavier than if you had simply died cleanly in combat. Harrington nodded slowly. You're right. It would have been cleaner if I'd died, simpler. But I didn't die, and that's created something rather extraordinary, hasn't it? We're sitting here, 2 veterans of opposite sides, now allies working toward the same goal. Our entire purpose at this base is to ensure that the next generation doesn't have to fight the way we did. The irony is not lost on me, Richter admitted. Nor on me, Harrington replied. But consider this, Major. You shot me down in 1943. You took my sight, ended my career as a pilot, nearly killed me. And yet here we are in 1963, and I'm going to work with you to improve NATO coordination and save lives. If that's not proof that humans can transcend their worst moments, I don't know what is. Richter stood abruptly and walked to the window, looking out at the airfield where British and German aircraft sat side by side. How can you be so forgiving, so rational about this? Because anger would accomplish nothing, Harrington said simply. I was angry, Major. God knows I was furious for months after I woke up in that hospital and realized I would never see again. But anger is exhausting, and I had a choice. Spend my life hating an enemy pilot whose name I didn't even know, or build something meaningful with the life I had left. I chose the latter. Over the following days, an extraordinary partnership developed between the 2 officers. What could have been an impossible working relationship, poisoned by history and trauma, instead became something remarkable. Harrington and Richter discovered they shared not just a violent past, but a deep understanding of aerial combat, tactical doctrine, and the psychology of fighter pilots. Their initial awkwardness gave way to professional respect, then genuine collaboration. Richter found himself describing German fighter tactics from the war with unprecedented honesty, knowing that Harrington would understand the nuances in ways other officers couldn't. Harrington, in turn, shared insights from the British perspective, analyzing how RAF doctrine had evolved in response to Luftwaffe tactics. One evening, working late in the operations room, reviewing scramble response times, Richter posed a question that had been bothering him. Squadron Leader, that day over the channel, after my first burst hit you, your aircraft performed a series of evasive maneuvers, barrel rolls, vertical dives, completely unpredictable. I assumed at the time it was panic or loss of control, but now, knowing you survived, I wonder if it was deliberate. Harrington paused, his fingers resting on the braille notes his assistant had prepared. Partially deliberate. After your first burst, I couldn't see. Blood everywhere, possibly blind. I didn't know which at the time, but I could still feel the aircraft. So I did the only thing that made sense. Make myself impossible to predict. Random maneuvers, no pattern, hoping you'd lose track or give up. Obviously, it didn't work. It nearly did, Richter admitted. You were extraordinarily difficult to track. I had to follow you through cloud cover, something we were specifically trained not to do because of the risk. But I was young, aggressive, determined to confirm the kill. If you had managed another minute of evasion, I would have broken off and returned to altitude. 1 minute, Harrington said softly. The difference between life and death measured in seconds. Their conversations extended beyond the technical. Late one night, sharing coffee in the officers' mess, after most personnel had retired, Richter finally voiced the question that had haunted him since their first meeting. Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if I had missed? If my aim had been slightly off and you had made it back to England? Harrington considered this carefully. I used to. In the early years, when the bitterness was fresh, I would lie awake imagining alternate histories, continuing to fly, surviving the war with my sight intact, a different career, a different life. He paused, taking a sip of coffee. But then I met my wife, Catherine. She was a nurse at the rehabilitation center, where I learned to navigate the world without vision. If I hadn't been shot down, hadn't been injured, I would never have been there. We would never have met. Your children? 2 daughters, both grown now. Sarah is studying medicine, Elizabeth is an architect. Pride warmed his voice. I wouldn't trade them for anything, Major, not even for my sight. Richter absorbed this, struggling with the implications. So you're saying that my shooting you down, taking your sight, nearly killing you, ultimately led to the family you love? That's exactly what I'm saying. Life is a chain of consequences, Major. Some violent, some gentle, all interconnected. You pulled the trigger in 1943, and the consequences rippled forward in ways neither of us could have predicted. Yes, I lost my sight, but I gained other things. A different career that I find deeply meaningful. A family I cherish. The ability to contribute to peace between our nations in ways I never could have as a combat pilot. The 3-month review progressed with remarkable efficiency. Harrington and Richter produced comprehensive recommendations for improving NATO air defense coordination, many of which would be implemented across the alliance. Their working relationship became something of a legend on the base, the blind RAF officer and the former Luftwaffe ace who had once tried to kill each other, now collaborating seamlessly. Other officers noticed something unusual. When Harrington and Richter briefed their findings, they demonstrated an almost telepathic understanding of fighter tactics. They could finish each other's tactical analyses, predict how pilots would react in specific scenarios, and identify vulnerabilities in defensive doctrine that others missed. They were, in a strange way, perfectly matched. 2 sides of the same aerial combat expertise, forged in the same brutal crucible of war. Group Captain Richardson, observing them work together, remarked to his deputy, "Those 2 understand air combat better than any officers I've ever seen. It's as if they're speaking a language only they know." His deputy, unaware of the full history, replied, "Perhaps they've fought the same battles, sir." Richardson, who did know, simply nodded. As the assignment neared its end, both men felt the weight of impending separation. They had found something unexpected in each other. Not quite friendship, but something deeper. A mutual recognition of shared experience that transcended nationality and history. On their final working day, Richter presented Harrington with a gift, a detailed scale model of a Messerschmitt Bf 109. "I realize you cannot see it," Richter said quietly, "but perhaps you can feel it. This was the aircraft I flew when we met. I wanted you to know exactly what it was that shot you down." Harrington ran his fingers over the model, tracing the propeller, the wings, the distinctive angular lines. "It's beautiful," he said finally. "Deadly but beautiful. Engineering at its finest." "As was your Spitfire," Richter replied. "Worthy opponents in worthy aircraft." Harrington reached into his briefcase and withdrew a photograph. "This is for you." It's a photo of me standing beside my Spitfire in 1942 before our encounter. Catherine described it to me, had it properly framed. "I want you to see what I looked like before that day changed both our lives." Richter accepted the photograph, studying the young pilot standing proudly beside his fighter. Harrington at 21, confident, whole, still possessing the sight he would lose months later. "Thank you," Richter managed, his voice thick. "I will treasure this." The formal farewell ceremony at RAF Gütersloh was attended by senior officers from both British and German air forces. The NATO coordination review that Harrington and Richter had conducted was being hailed as a model of international military cooperation. Recommendations from their report would shape Allied air defense doctrine for the next decade. But for those who knew the full story, and there were only a handful, the true achievement had nothing to do with tactical doctrine. During the official proceedings, Harrington was called forward to receive a commendation from the NATO Allied Air Force's Central Europe commander. As he walked to the podium with practiced confidence, his white cane tapping a measured rhythm, Richter watched from the assembled officers and felt an overwhelming sense of completion. This man, whom he had tried to kill 20 years earlier, had not only survived, but had transcended the violence that had defined their first meeting. The commander spoke of Harrington's extraordinary contributions to Allied defense coordination and his unique insights into fighter operations. Richter knew the truth behind those careful words. Harrington's insights were unique precisely because they had been forged in the crucible of aerial combat and refined through the perspective that comes from having lost everything and rebuilt from nothing. When the ceremony concluded, Harrington and Richter found themselves alone one final time in the operations room where they had spent so many hours working together. The evening sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across tactical maps and briefing documents. "What will you do after this assignment?" Richter asked. "Return to England, continue my work with RAF intelligence, eventually retire and spend time with my grandchildren." Harrington smiled. "What about you?" "Similar path. The Luftwaffe is expanding, which means more coordination work with NATO partners. Perhaps we will cross paths again at another base, another assignment." "I would welcome that," Harrington said sincerely. Richter hesitated, then spoke the words he had been preparing for days. "Squadron Leader Harrington, James, I need you to know something. When I was training new pilots during the war, I told them to respect their opponents, to fight with honor even in the midst of horror. But those were just words until I met you. You have shown me what true honor looks like. Not the honor of the victor, but the honor of the man who survives defeat and builds something meaningful from the wreckage." Harrington was quiet for a moment, his sightless eyes glistening. "Klaus, may I call you Klaus?" "Please. Klaus, you gave me a gift 20 years ago, though you didn't know it. You shot me down, yes, took my sight, nearly killed me. But in doing so, you showed me that I was more than just my eyes, more than just a pilot. You forced me to discover depths of resilience and purpose I never knew I possessed. I wouldn't have chosen that path. God knows I wouldn't have chosen it. But having walked it, I can honestly say I'm grateful for where it led." Richter extended his hand. "Then let us part as friends, not merely as former enemies." Harrington grasped the offered hand firmly. "Friends, yes. That seems appropriate." What happened next became legend among the NATO community, though the full story was known to only a few. Harrington and Richter maintained correspondence for the rest of their lives. They met periodically at military conferences and NATO events. When Richter's son expressed interest in becoming a pilot, Harrington wrote him a letter, dictated but heartfelt, about the responsibilities and sacrifices of military aviation. When Harrington's daughter Sarah graduated medical school, Richter sent a telegram of congratulations. In 1973, 10 years after their reunion at Gütersloh, they appeared together at a NATO symposium on air combat history. Their joint presentation, Lessons from Adversaries, How Former Enemies Inform Modern Doctrine, was attended by over 300 officers from 12 nations. They spoke candidly about their wartime encounter, the 20-year gap, and their subsequent collaboration. The audience sat in stunned silence as these two veterans demonstrated that reconciliation was not just possible, but could produce genuine friendship. A young German pilot approached them after the presentation. "How is it possible?" he asked. "How can you forgive someone who took so much from you?" Harrington's response became famous in military circles. "Forgiveness isn't about forgetting or excusing what happened. It's about refusing to let the past poison the future. Major Richter and I could have spent our lives as enemies, bitter and resentful. Instead, we chose to become allies. That choice, not the bullets, not the violence, that's what defines us." Richter died in 1987 at the age of 67, having served in the post-war Luftwaffe with distinction. His obituary in German military publications mentioned his wartime service and his contributions to NATO, but those who attended his funeral knew his greatest achievement was the bridge he had built with a former enemy. Harrington lived until 1995, reaching the age of 74. At his funeral, his family was surprised to receive a letter from Richter's widow containing the photograph Harrington had given Richter 3 decades earlier, the young pilot standing beside his Spitfire, proud and whole. The accompanying note explained that Klaus had kept it on his desk until his death, a reminder of the cost of war and the possibility of peace. Today, at RAF Gütersloh, there is a small plaque in the officers' mess. It commemorates the 1963 NATO Coordination Review and the 2 officers who conducted it. The plaque doesn't mention that they had once been mortal enemies, that one had shot down the other, that violence had marked their first meeting. It simply states, "In memory of Squadron Leader James Harrington, RAF, and Major Klaus Richter, Luftwaffe, former adversaries, lasting friends. May their example illuminate the path from conflict to cooperation." That perhaps is the truest legacy of their impossible reunion. Not just that enemies can become allies, but that the worst moments of our past can, through courage and forgiveness, transform into bridges toward a better future.